Ridiculous, they'd said, and I felt that word slam into my chest like a door closing on my own lungs. You won't amount to a thing, they whispered through the walls of that old house, and I learned to breathe around the ridicule the way a desert learns to catch a drop of rain. Tonight, I tell you the truth I carried in my bones. The earth finally spoke back, and the voice was mine. I parked where the gravel crunched under the tires of a borrowed SUV, not my own, and stepped into a kitchen that hadn't changed since my first memory of being told to sit still and stop dreaming. The counters smelled of burnt toast and old apologies. My mother stood by the sink, hands wet, eyes dry from years of pretending not to see what I was becoming. My father leaned against the doorframe, as if his spine might crack from the weight of years of "you'll fail" echoing in the wood. My sister's eyes hopped from the newspaper to me and back, calculating the moment to mock that would sting the longest. They hadn't believed the dreams I kept in a backpack of ideas, rewilding a bone-dry landscape, turning the wasteland of a drought-stunned valley into a mosaic of forest, wetlands, and living soil. The hook is not merely a memory, it's a pattern interrupt. I tell you now, the lesson I was beginning to learn in that kitchen is the same I learned in the fields, in the nurseries, in the months when the rains refused to come and the critics refused to quiet. You can call a dream ridiculous 1,000 times, but the moment you decide to answer with action, the word becomes a tool you use to hammer your own fate into something real. The painful departure and relentless pursuit. I left that day with a backpack of paint tubes? No, with a battered notebook of maps, soil tests, and a stubborn promise to myself. Prove them wrong by proving the land right. They said I'd waste away chasing mirages, that a dreamer had no place in a family built on hard, measurable outcomes. I packed away every leftover meal of doubt and carried forward the single faith I could not shake. The land would teach me what to do if I would only listen. I studied restoration ecology the way a hunger-struck man studies bread. I rode buses across states, learned the stories of farmers who banked their futures on rain that never came, and began to see the land as a patient, unforgiving teacher who rewards discipline. I founded a small nonprofit that planted trees on marginal farms, built swales to catch every drop of water, studied soil microbes like hidden currency, and kept a running ledger of every seed that sprouted when the world said it wouldn't. My friends said I was ambitious. My childhood self whispered that this is how you heal a world that betrayed you. By becoming the thing you believed in, not the thing you were told to be. The initial ridicule never fully left the room. It lingered in the way my father's voice would interrupt a phone call to remind me that a decent man does not gamble with his lineage. It settled in the corners of my mornings when the wind pressed against my sunburnt cheeks, and I wondered if the dream would survive the season's droughts. But the work began to answer the words with green, test plots that survived where grass would not. A creek bed that filled with water after years of parched silence. A hillside that wore a thin veneer of moss like a new skin after a long illness. The ridicule felt pale against the weight of seeing a seedling pull itself toward light, against the sound of birds returning to a valley that had learned to breathe again. The arduous ascension and profound triumph. Years turned like pages in a well-worn field guide. I learned to speak in the dialects of soils and seedlings. I learned to measure success not by a bank balance, but by the number of species returning, by the revival of pollinators, by a stream that refused to run dry, even in late July. I planted millions of trees, but more importantly, I planted an ethic. If you guard the ground, it will guard you back. It wasn't glamorous, far from it. There were nights when the wind teased the plastic sheeting and every piece of equipment hummed like a chorus of reminders that I might be deluded. There were days when a drought clawed at the roots, and I had to lay my hands in the dirt and tell the land I would not quit. The battles were not won with bright slogans, but with stubborn, repetitive care. Mulching, drip irrigation to reduce evaporation, native species selected for resilience and function, community workshops that taught families to read the land the way a farmer reads a weathered map. And then, slowly, the iron window into possibility opened. A hillside transformed from brown to green in the span of a season. A degraded wetland revived into a living corridor for reeds, cranes, and salamanders. A cornfield rotated into a saya of oaks, cottonwoods, and fruit trees that fed neighbors and birds alike. I saw the look in people's eyes, the tired skepticism fitting away into curiosity and then wonder. It wasn't about the scars I carried, or the supposed absurdity of the dream. It was about the truth that when a landscape is given back its dignity, the people who depend on it regain theirs as well. The work began to speak in a language that even the fiercest critics could not ignore. Undeniable, measurable restoration that felt like a promise kept to every child who ever believed in the impossible. The cathartic return and poetic justice. And then I went home with the knowledge I could no longer pretend I was any one thing the family expected. The first sign of karma's ledger arrived not with a fanfare, but with a quiet invasion of color. The barren hill behind the old house, once a patchwork of dust and scrub, now wore a soft green shawl of young trees. The creek, which I had mapped as a dry thread, ran with a pale silver laughter after a rain. It wasn't a dream manufactured on a whiteboard. It was a living, breathing system that required people to keep showing up year after year, season after season. The moment they walked to the window and saw the green was the moment the room exhaled. My father stood there first, his breath riding on a gust of wind that rattled the glass. He did not apologize in the traditional way, with words that soften a sting. Instead, his face relaxed. The lines that had learned to judge me mellowed into a rough, honest awe. My mother's eyes glistened, not with anger, but with a cautious pride that said she finally understood the index by which she could measure my life. My sister, who had labeled my dream a joke, found herself quiet enough to listen as birdsong filled the valley with a sound she hadn't heard since childhood. It wasn't a courtroom of confessions, but a living demonstration of the life I had chosen to build and the cost I had paid to plant it. I spoke then, not to demand forgiveness, but to offer a simple accounting. The land had given me a purpose, and I had given it my stubborn faith in return. The ledger balanced in a way that mattered most. The world came back to me with more than money could buy. A sense of belonging, a sense that a ridiculous dream could be the one thing that saved a family from its own drought. We stood together, finally aligned, watching the valley breathe again. The seeds I had planted years ago were now roots, and the roots were spreading into the minds of those who once doubted me. Karma, after all, isn't quick. It doesn't arrive with a fanfare. It arrives as a forest, as a stream, as a thriving ecosystem that insists on telling the truth. That belief, when paired with patient labor, is a form of stubborn love that heals both land and lineage, the ending then a beginning. I tell you the truth I learned on this road. The dream you're mocked for may be the only dream you're meant to carry. The ridicule is the furnace that tests your mettle, the work, the proof that you are not the embarrassment they predicted, but the person who would not abandon a future they couldn't even see. I did not just build a thriving landscape, I rebuilt the family's faith in the future and in themselves. If you listen to the land, it will teach you not only how to restore a place, but how to restore a life. And so I stand here now in a home where the walls hold a different memory, among people who finally hear my name with less fear and more respect. I learned that the field of triumph is not the conquest of a barren land, but the healing of a human heart, the heart that dares to believe when the odds are against you, and the heart that in time becomes the living proof that a ridiculous dream can be the most powerful instrument of truth we ever wield. The land and the family and the life I chose to grow in them prove this. There is a way to turn every drought into a new beginning if you have the courage to plant and to wait and to keep showing up.